Ukraine winning. And Mr. Chairman just said we need to provide Ukraine everything it needs to be able to win. Are we providing Ukraine what it needs to win? And is that actually our policy in the United States?
Thank you very much for monitoring our conversation this evening. Oh, no. Thank you for monitoring our conversation, for sharing your background and your knowledge of this important subject. It's an honor to be with Speaker Stefanchuk, and I'll pick up where he left off. Salva Grani. You can all say that, you know. Okay? You ready? Usually this. Salva. In any event, what the Speaker has laid out, we call him Speaker. We've been calling him Speaker for more than a year now. But in any event, as has been indicated, 1 year ago, the President of Ukraine came here, issued the warning that was there, challenged us by saying, you know, where is the security structure of the Western world and the free world? We're on the verge of a Russian initiation of hostilities. We need help. And then he went home, but it was a real clarion call, challenge to conscience. It was wonderful. And of course, within 24 hours, the Russians invaded. The U.S. was useful in terms of our intelligence, which was telling NATO, this is going to happen. We know that this is going to happen. But to get to this, so relating the list that the Speaker gave us to a chronology, sometime right after that, we passed a bill, $12 billion, in the Congress to send there. Then we went to Kyiv. We had a delegation that went to Kyiv the first couple of days of May, where President Zelensky gave us, again, the agenda, some of the issues at that time, relating to four things, relating to military assistance, humanitarian assistance, economic assistance, and humanitarian assistance, enumerating how many people are in the country, outside, refugees outside, displaced within, and what the needs were, very specifically in terms of numbers and in terms of kind of weapons that were needed. We came back, and then that, within a few weeks, we passed a $40 billion package, 39 point something, I think, a package for Ukraine, in a very bipartisan way, Then following that, we had, in April, we had the seize and freeze. In May, we had Lend-Lease. Every few weeks, we had a different bill. So his first thing is the equipment. And that has changed over time. What we asked for, we came back in May and asked for, was a must-have list, and we did eventually get that, but then we have it more and more. Now we want the F-16s, and I fully support and I'm hopeful that that will happen. I don't see why we can't be training on them now, even if we don't have a full commitment to have them, because it will take a while to train. So that was the main part of the additional. Okay, secondly, we talked about sanctions. The sanctions are very important, but they have to work, as the Speaker said. Part of the sanctions were, as I said, in the seize and freeze. We would seize the assets of the Russians, and we would freeze them, thaw them out later, to go to one of your further points, to rebuild Ukraine with Russian money, Then we talked about them as an aggressive terrorist nation, and we have legislation, one form or another, that we will pass in a bipartisan way. We've been working on it for a while, and we had working on the legalities and this or that. Fourth point, war is war. Call it war. Well, I don't know how the Russians think they can get away with calling it anything else, but they do. And again, when we're talking about accountability, I'm not sure if this was 5 or within accountability. There's accountability for the individual acts of rape as a weapon of war, and kidnapping thousands of children and taking them to the far reaches. I think some of those children are closer to Alaska now than they were to Ukraine. They've taken them to, these are sins, crimes against humanity. Those people should be held accountable. But I was told that there's nothing a Russian soldier does that he hasn't been given orders to do, which takes us to another level of a definition of a terrorist country, and that is aggressor nation, which means that the hierarchy of the government is held accountable for what happens in war. We can do ours in terms of behavior of individuals and the rest. The other aggressive, that's an act of the United Nations, so that's something that's going to take a little more work and a little more time. But whether it's again among those 4 things and that the 10 list were, humanitarian assistance has been vast coming from the United States. Germany is the 2nd largest contributor to the cause one way or another, but so many countries have been so generous in welcoming refugees, but there's plenty of humanitarian assistance that is needed within, and you all have made this clear to us along the way, whether they're displaced persons or people living in war zones and really don't have too many options, they need humanitarian assistance. The economic assistance is really important. They need money for the budget, they need money to pay the teachers, to pay those soldiers and the rest of that, and they need outside investment into Ukraine. They need outside investment even now, the outside and economic investment. And so we're hoping in our meetings along the way that we can be a source of it and encouraging that. So humanitarian, economic, weapons we talked about, and again, just the idea that these people have so much courage. They're fighting for democracy. I've been told that I should use different language. Last night at a meeting they said, if you want it to be appealing, you should say they're fighting for freedom. Now, I don't know, you tell me, that we're fighting for freedom and liberty, and that's something that resonates with everybody in the world, even if they're not definitely in favor of a democracy. Matter of discussion. But in any event, yes, to your question, yes, I believe the United States is living up to our, as our Vice President spoke so beautifully today, to our values and to the strategic necessity of our assisting Ukraine. And of course, we want to get those airplanes, we want the air power, and it remains to be seen, but hopefully on a front burner. I yield back.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Madam Speaker, and thank you so much for your leadership in the many years you have spent, of course, in the House of Representatives, ensuring that we had bipartisan support for Ukraine, and the many packages we passed through the U.S. Congress to ensure that that happens. May I just ask a follow-up question? Thank you for laying out the agenda that you're seeking to achieve together with Speaker Stefanchuk and with the Ukrainian people, because I do want to highlight that this is an agenda for the Ukrainian people. It's not for the Ukrainian government. Of course, it represents the Ukrainian people, really talking about the entire country. And this has, what you're laying out here, of course, has massive public support in Ukraine. President Zelensky has incredible support in Ukraine. But in the United States, we're seeing some of the poll numbers, right? We still have very strong bipartisan support. Correct me if I'm wrong, but we have very strong bipartisan support in the U.S. Congress, both in the Senate and in the House for Ukraine. We have enshrined that support in our budget for the year. But if we look across the public opinion, it is slipping. A lot of the public opinion numbers among both parties, though the drop is much more significant, of course, on the Republican side, it's slipping. And that's bringing up a lot of concern among my Ukrainian colleagues, many of whom are here today, also from the Ukrainian parliament, Ukrainian civil society, that Ukraine fatigue is seeping in to U.S. politics. How do you speak to your constituencies to make the case for why the United States should continue to support Ukraine?
Well, let me respectfully not subscribe to that characterization of where the American people are. There may be people who don't want to spend money or this or that, whatever it might be. But overwhelmingly, the American people, they've taken Ukrainians into their homes. They've supported people who have supported these budgets all along. They are for victory. And again, I don't want to give any currency to any press reports that, oh, that's some weakening. It's the way it is. It is a message of success, a message of victory. Oh, they ask all kinds of questions. The press asks all kinds of questions. And we're like, why are you asking that? We're just going to win, baby. We're just going to stay in this until we win. And it's about democracy, freedom, liberty for the Ukrainian people, but for the world. And again, I think the Vice President laid it out very well today in terms of values and in terms of strategic necessity for us to hold the line on Putin. I do not fear that there is any weakening of support for the people of Ukraine, as you characterize it correctly, in all of this.
I think that's a very important message to hear from you and from other representatives of the U.S. government here, not just in Munich, but across Europe, because as someone that talks to our European allies and colleagues all the time, we do hear an anxiety about where the U.S. stands. There's a lot of concern about our elections, et cetera. So I think the more you can take that message home here as you're doing your tours, I think that's very, very important.
Well, may I just say, but one of the questions that was asked of the Vice President today is, well, you have an election coming up, so how are you going to sustain? That's almost 2 years away. We want this war to be won by then.
That's right.
And so what are we asking about an election in 2024, November, when what we're talking about is winning as soon as possible?
That's right, this year.
This year.
Madam Speaker, please.
What I wanted to, well, following up on what distinguished speaker said now and just before your follow-up question, at a security breakfast this morning, a very experienced, talented, respected security leader said, in a war, you don't always win because of the things you can count unless you count on the spirit of the people. And that is what is so fabulous to observe when you talk about people not being tired or people getting fatigue or whatever it is that the outside people may have when the soldiers are fighting and their families are sacrificing and the rest. So that spirit is something that is just lifting everyone up. When you ask about other parliaments, well, this is the biggest delegation we have. The Prime Minister of the UK said today it's their biggest delegation, and that is really because of Ukraine. We thought we had the biggest delegation last year without Ukraine, but this far surpasses that. But did you hear, we were very proud to have President Zelensky come before Congress right before Christmas, and the response was just fabulous, bipartisan, and prolonged, and fabulous. Then to see him at the Westminster Hall. Did you see that? Did you hear what the parliamentarians said before he spoke and after he spoke, and the response that he received? There's almost nothing recent like it. And when I say recent, I mean decades. So I think if they were not making this fight, if the Ukrainians were not making this fight, where would we be with NATO? Forgetting, just putting NATO aside for a moment, what about the countries in the region, Moldova, other countries that do not have a Title V, Article 5 protection, and what that means for them? So we have a big debt of gratitude to the people of Ukraine, to the courage of their leadership, of the soldiers and the rest, and we're very proud of some Americans who've gone over to join the fight.
So thank you, Madam Speaker. I do want to open it up to questions from the audience. I see quite a few distinguished members of the audience here. If anybody wants to come in, also online, if you're following the conversation, please feel free to send your questions over, and I'll try to work them in as well. Do I see a hand? Yes. Deputy Popescu,
As
please.
you pass the mic, I just want to observe that the Deputy Speaker of the Latvian Parliament is with us. Thank you for joining us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for a beautiful panel, Madam Speaker and Alina. I would like to raise a question, which I raised it many times today, because I know it's one part of the work that SIPA was doing on the Hill, and I want to thank you for that, Alina, for the efforts. We are talking about the Black Sea region, and I know that many congressmen and senators, and I want to thank also for that, focused and started to realize the importance of the Black Sea region. I want to ask you, Madam Speaker, according to the fact that you set up the base through the Congress of Omnibus legislation, and which talks about the Black Sea, if you believe that it's urgent to set up a strategy there in that region in order to help more Ukraine and countries like Moldova to insulate the whole region and secure the grain crossing and what will happen in the near future. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your question. I share the response that our distinguished Secretary of State made today. Yes, indeed, this is very important. It's not only important to Ukraine, I mean, of course it's important to Ukraine, but important to the region, but important to anyone who depends on food from Ukraine or other exports from Ukraine. So that I appreciate the knowledge that you have and the sensitivity on that subject, but you cannot have the total picture unless that would be included, in my view.
And Madam Speaker, can I just follow up on the Black Sea security question for a moment? I'm not going to cite some of the media coverage that's been happening the last several days, but do you think, and is it the sense of perhaps your colleagues, that Ukraine can be secure if Crimea remains somehow occupied by Russia?
Well, this is a very subjective question. Of course, it's all up to the Ukrainians. As far as I'm concerned, and many of my colleagues, we think Russia has to go. It's an embarrassment that they occupied Crimea without the appropriate reaction to it at the time. And maybe Jerry would like to respond to it as well, because he speaks not only as a member of the House, but as a former chair of the NATO interparliamentary group.
Sure.
But in my view,
no, I appreciate. Thank you for saying that on the record, Congressman Connolly.
Thank you, and thank you, Madam Speaker. And I completely agree. I would 2 points. Russia needs to leave all Ukrainian sovereign territory. They must. Otherwise, even if we succeed in pushing them back in most occupied territory, they can use that as a platform in a few years to do it again. Secondly, I would also say none of us ought to be opining about what could be negotiated on behalf of Ukraine. It is up to Ukraine to decide what it is or is not willing to put on the table in negotiations. And when you're in the middle of a war, it is not a smart thing to be negotiating away somebody's territory. We saw that with Kissinger in Davos, and it was a remarkable moment. Like, I thought, well, who elected you to decide on behalf of the Ukrainian people as they're fighting and dying for their freedom and democracy, that somehow they need to wake up and start to put their sovereign territory on the table. So I agree completely with Speaker Pelosi. That's not our call. And this is not the time to be even talking about that while brave men and women are fighting and dying.
Thank you, Congressman, for that statement. Mr. Chairman, I'm going to come back to you in just a second, but I want to bring in Boris Ruga into the conversation. Ambassador Ruga, please.
Thank you very much. Welcome, Speaker Pelosi. It's a huge honor to have you back in Munich. When we were in Washington, D.C. in May of last year, you were kind enough to host us at Congress. And I think that really underlined the close relationship between the MSC and the United States Congress. And so welcome once again here. It's a real pleasure to see you on stage alongside Ruslan Stefanchuk. And I think that is very symbolic as well. I don't know whether you've touched on this already because I'm running from one thing to another, but what I'd be interested in is the sort of connection between the US Congress and the Rada in Ukraine and how that has worked during this conflict and how it has been productive in addressing Russia's aggression. Perhaps you've dealt with that already. If not, I'd be very interested in your point of view.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Ruga. Madam Speaker, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, well, let's just say that we've had sort of a constant communication between the Congress and the Speaker. I have had great conversations and communication, but he has had that across the aisle, across the Capitol, and the rest. But let me just tell you a few things. So he comes, he makes the pitch, the whole thing. We have a video from the president. Oh, that was a big deal. Packed and jammed, Democrats and Republicans, House and Senate. Then we have the First Lady. She came in person. Fabulous. That's the executive branch. But in terms of parliament to parliament, this is so important. And as I say, NATO and the interparliamentary group, parliament to parliament is so important because that's where policy is made. That's where money is allocated. Especially in the Constitution of the United States says that's the House of Representatives. But then we've met other places. We met in Berlin for the NATO meeting of speakers. Stefanchuk came. It was just a NATO, but it wasn't NATO. It was the G7. It was the G7 in Berlin, which then led us to Croatia, where you had, what, 50 speakers? Members of 55 representatives of parliament from all over the world, where we had shared our, shall we say, enthusiasms about all of this. So he has been masterful in recognizing the role of parliaments, and in terms of the U.S., and we've had so many phone calls, Zooms, and the rest. So there was never any doubt as to what their preferences and priorities are. And we feel very complimented to get the purpose. This is why we need this. This is when we need it. And I'll talk to anybody about it. Stefanchuk.
So, Mr. Speaker, please. We only have a few minutes. If there's any final question, I'll take it now. And then I want to give Speaker Stefanchuk the final closing. Yes, madam, please.
Hello, my name is Zanda Kalniņa Lukaševica. I'm Deputy Speaker of the Latvian Parliament. And thank you so much, Speaker Pelosi and Speaker Stefanchuk, for everything you said. And indeed, it's important for us to continue political, financial, military support to Ukraine as much as possible. But as we are approaching a symbolic milestone, the 24th of February, if I may, at the conclusion of this discussion, ask both of you a rather personal question. If you would compare how you personally felt like a day before the February 24th last year and how it is today. So knowing what's ahead and also seeing how the year has passed, if you could share with us, and maybe that could help to raise additional support internationally. Indeed. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for your kind words.
Yes, when he called me that first time, he said, I can't talk too long because they're bombing or whatever. In any event, it was a sincere and honest relationship between the members of Congress and the Speaker and other members of Parliament who are here. But let me just say, when that day, to your question, Madam Speaker, on that day, we heard President Zelensky speak, and he challenged as I said earlier, he challenged the security structure of the free world. Why weren't we there? Would they be there, and all of that? He was just remarkable and so brave to just come out of Ukraine, come make that speech and leave. So we're overwhelmed by his bravery and hoping that, obviously, for the best, and how could, of course, we would be there for them. This was about sovereignty. It was about not respecting borders. It was more of an up-here kind of thing. For a long time now, I've had a really difficult time trying to understand why the world is not up in arms about using women, rape of women, kidnapping of children as a weapon of war. I just have seen and heard so many stories. Many parliamentarians, grassroots activists, and the rest have come to visit us in the Capitol and bring these stories. And to think that that this outrage, I mean, it would take too long to go into all of raping people in front of their children or in front of their parents, dismembering them in front of their family. It's brutal. And when I said to a Russian expert, this war is turning these Russian soldiers into animals. It's just terrible. I guess that's what war does to you. They said, make no mistake, those soldiers don't do anything they're not ordered to do. So this is the regime, the government is responsible for this. So in any event, it's now more of an emotional response of, if only everybody was aware of it, how could they vote against a resolution criticizing, or more than that, the Russians at the United Nations? How could everybody not just say that this is behavior outside the circle of civilized human behavior? So more emotional, more sort of, not unemotional, but more, less emotional than now. And just want to close by praising our President, President Joe Biden. Try to do this briefly. When I was a student, I was at John Kennedy's inauguration. And everybody in the world, or all Americans, know that in that speech, he said to the citizens of America, ask not what you can do for what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. Kids learn that in school. Everybody knows it, even if their parents weren't even born then. The next line, though, in the speech is what I remembered as a student. The next line, he said, to the citizens of the world, ask not what America can do for you, but what we can do working together for the freedom of mankind. And I believe that Joe Biden was having a Kennedy-esque time, era, moment, in the manner in which he worked with countries, not in condescension, not in saying this is how we would do it, but listening and building consensus among the NATO nations, and first and foremost, listening to the Ukrainians, working together for the freedom of mankind. That is what this is about, and that's why we're all so grateful to the Ukrainian people for fighting for the freedom of mankind there and in the world. Thank you.